Yes, the time a new gacha game releases, and with that we also have yet again another agony of choice when it comes to picking our free standard banner character from a selector. After your initial 50 pulls, you get to select one of the 6 standard banner characters, so let's talk about which one is the right one to pick for you. A disclaimer to ahead. First, the game is new and frankly nobody really knows the game's meta and all of the game's mechanics in and out, so any advice you get within the first weeks of the game's release is always to be taken with a grain of salt regardless of who it is from. Because of that, I will also not rate how good each character is and instead list their pros and cons and give a small overview on what each character does and how they play, so you can base your decision on that rather than me making a meta assumption that is likely to be wrong in a few months anyways. Second, a game is also supposed to be fun, and if you simply like a character, well, go and pick them. Also, let me know in the comments on who you will choose. That being said, let's begin with Daffodill. Daffodill is a break quickswap DPS and excels at inflicting high break damage while taking short amounts of field time. She is also the only Chaos Esper in the game, at least as of the game's release, and Haniel, one of the best generic buffers at the time of release, requires a Chaos character to be able to trigger Nova and make use of her second passive. With Lacrimosa not being available at launch, a good chunk of Haniel's attack buff is locked behind having Daffodill, as Nova can otherwise not be triggered, so she loses a bit of value without Daffodill. Daffodill and Haniel can make up for a great generic core in many teams and synergize nicely with other incantation characters, as Chaos is also required to trigger Scorch, an Esper cycle debuff that is emphasized by many incantation teams, including but not limited to Sakiri, Adler, and Baicang. Means if you intend on playing either Haniel or a DOT team, Daffodill is one of the best choices, as she is, at least as of the game's release, again, the only Chaos character in the game. Obviously, that does not mean that you cannot play those characters or teams without Daffodill. They do, however, lose quite a bit of value. Adler requires Scorch to apply his debuff, Baicang requires Scorch to inflict another Scorch, and Sakiri buffs damage over time effects such as Scorch and also requires it for her buff in the first place as well. And Scorch requires Chaos. Or in other words, Daffodill. It should also be mentioned that breaking enemies is effectively just a way of applying crowd control that is accompanied by a large chunk of break damage that also works against bosses, unlike normal crowd control effects, so a dedicated breaker in the team can provide value through this as well. And lastly, pairing with her is also really nice as it grants her a reset on her ultimate. Sakiri is an incantation support, and her primary strengths are crowd control, a generic attack buff to everyone in the team but herself, and buffing damage over time effects. Her crowd control only works against weak enemies, which means not versus bosses. The attack buff is honestly not too bad, but a little bit diluted due to a somewhat-ish high attack saturation in this game, and the damage over time buff requires Scorch, so she primarily shines in Scorch-based DOT teams. Or in other words, in teams with Baicang, Adler, and maybe Lacrimosa when she releases, or, well, generally teams that can trigger the Scorch Esper cycle. She will work nicely as a generic buffer, however, and can bring extra value to anima DPSs as well, such as Nunnally, Mint, or Jiuyuan, by granting access to the Hexed Esper cycle. If you want to play a DOT team, Sakiri is your best choice, but she will work nicely in the previously mentioned comps as well. Baicang is an incantation DOT main DPS with a very interesting kit, and is not the easiest character to play. His sole purpose is to deal damage, and he does so by having different attack branches depending on his previous attacks. His ultimate also provides a damage over time effect, a low-level execute, and also death immunity for a short time, as well as some self-healing, making him honestly an accessible character who does require a bit of thinking to play him effectively, however. Basically means he is a high skill, high reward character. He synergizes well with Daffodill, as she is the only Chaos Vesper, as we have already now mentioned quite a few times, and Chaos is also a required attribute in the team to trigger Scorch, and while Baicang inflicts another source of Scorch if the enemy is already affected by Scorch, effectively doubling Scorch's effectiveness. He provides a strong area of effect and is the primary DPS within DOT-based teams. Because of that, he also synergizes well with Sakiri and Adler, with the first buffing damage over time effects and attack, and the latter applying random debuffs upon Scorched afflicted enemies and providing shields. Hathor is one of the only 2 Lakshana characters upon release, with the other one being the A-rank Skier, and she is an on-field quickswap high burst DPS with a strong AoE. Her playstyle revolves around building up stacks of her unique resource, then casting her ultimate to enter an enhanced state, buffing herself during it, and gaining access to a new skill, which then consumes the gained stacks. Hathor is very ultimate reliant, and she gains ultimate energy each time she also gains stacks. Stacks can be obtained through various ways. Each time an enemy is defeated, through her skill at a cooldown of 16 seconds, once after 5 seconds of entering combat from her trait, and also when triggering a critical riposte. This also means she excels in AoE scenarios and is heavily reliant on critical ripostes and hence also enemy attack patterns in boss fights, and this can be a heavy negative as well, as a lack of stack generation means she loses nearly all of her value. Lastly, she does have some unique mechanics to her, such as gaining additional stacks when attacked while holding her skill. Fadia is a unique Psyche HP scaling sub-DPS, as she operates by dealing damage to enemies, by redirecting a portion of the damage the teammates take to herself, then inflicting a percentage of that redirected damage upon marked enemies. Her ultimate allows her to shortly enter an enhanced state, being able to perform up to 5 follow-up attacks that deal mental damage and restoring her own HP. She works as a pseudo-shielder by taking damage herself instead of your teammates, and her ultimate dealing mental damage allows her to often ignore common enemy resistances, making her a universal choice. She is, however, very single-target focused, as she can only redirect damage dealt to one target unless you have her Awaken 6, which allows her to function in AoE scenarios. Lastly, Jiuyuan. She is an anime burst-focused sub-DPS, and her playstyle is centered around binding her targets, dealing damage over time, then accumulating rose-packed bullets, which she can consume to trigger large instances of burst damage on bound targets. Jiuyuan has high AoE and burst damage capabilities, but is somewhat reliant on either on the Blossom or Hexed Esper cycles, depending on how you want to play her. As a burst sub-DPS, she has problems binding targets, as she does so using her skill, Critical Riposte, that is a dodge counter, or her basic 5, which is required to trigger her burst, so she needs the Blossom Esper cycle to do that for her to minimize her field time. As a main DPS, she ideally wants Hexed to increase her damage capabilities. It should probably also be mentioned when I say damage over time, I do not actually mean DOT damage. While she does deal damage over time, that damage is classified as attachment damage, and hence she does not profit of Sakiri's DOT buff. If played as an anima main DPS, she competes with Nunnally for the role of said main DPS, with Nunnally being better in single target scenarios, whereas Jiuyuan shines in AoE. However, due to the lack of iframes in her held basic attack, I found her better suited to be used as a burst DPS, switching in shortly to cast her skill and ultimate or triggering Blossom, then switching her back out. As for my personal opinion, I would recommend Sakiri or Daffodill early on. Sakiri is very good for nearly every team that isn't Nunnally or Hathor, and Daffodill is the only Chaos character in the game, at least as of the game's release, and required for both Esper cycles, Scorch and Nova. Well, and also Discord. Arguably, Sakiri can also still be used within Nunnally teams, or Jiuyuan or Mint as well for that matter, as she allows for the Hexed Esper cycle. And with that, before we end the video, I want to put some emphasis on the amount of pulls we get. In fact, we get nearly 170 standard pulls in 1.0, and that means that you can get at least 1, if not 2 S ranks from the standard banner without spending any other premium currency. Because of that, I would recommend you to hold onto your selector until after that. That will also make the choice much easier. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this video has helped you a little bit. Don't forget to like and subscribe, leave me a comment on your thoughts about NTE and the standard banner characters and who you are gonna pick, and of course, join the Discord. A special thanks to my YouTube and Patreon members who make this content possible. I appreciate all of you and wish you a great day. Peace!